Exclusive corporate funding for American Experience is provided by Liberty Mutual. Major funding is made possible by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. American Experience is also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you. Thank you.
I remember as a child growing up in North Carolina, looking up and watching Kansas roll by, the Dust Bowl reaching North Carolina, of course. I also remember fires, floods, drought, erosion, soil gone. What do you have to live on? We were in a sad condition environmentally. The word environmental wasn't there at the time, basically, but the situation was, and it was a critical situation.
We didn't have food. We didn't have jobs. I don't think people realize how close this nation came to having a revolution.
If it hadn't been for Roosevelt and establishing the Civilian Conservation Corps, I don't know what a lot of us young guys would have done. I don't know what my next step would have been.
Give me your help not to win votes alone, but to win in this crusade to restore America to its own people.
I was raised on a farm, and we were poor. I just thought that was the way life was going to be. We didn't have an elaborate stuff to eat either. Like I say, cornbread for noon, cornbread and beans, and cold cornbread and milk for supper. My daddy didn't know hardly what fertilization was, rotation of crops, or soil erosion, and stuff like that. My ag teacher taught it, but he was just too far ahead of times, and the farmers didn't accept him.
There ain't no college professor going to teach me how to farm my land.
Oh, shut up. Let's listen.
How much land you got left that hasn't blown away? Look, man, let's quit arguing and kidding ourselves. We're all in the same boat. We're all gonna sink, unless we stick together. Every one of us has been served with a dispossess notice. Not by Uncle Sam or a bank or some mortgage company, but by a little old gal we've been kicking in the teeth, Mother Nature.
We had not taken care of our country. We had not taken care of our land. No basic scientific farming to speak of. Farm this, gut it, move on. Farm this, gut it, move. That's what we did. We talk 150 plus years of no care, of very poor care. I can remember playing in gullies 2 stories high. That was my playground. But it was a bad thing because that meant all that erosion and that much good land gone. The soil erosion that we're losing annually was enough to load a series of boxcars 7 times around the earth. That's a lot of dirt. Part of it goes back to the big timber companies of the 20s and 30s, cutting and cutting and cutting, leaving slash. Slash would burn, Storms would come, floods would come, and down the river goes our good fertile soil. The end result is it caught up with us. Total impact in 1930s. Big, big, big time impact with the resulting disaster.
I was born in Floresville, Texas in 1919. We were not hit hard in the beginning because we had a little plot of land and we could grow some vegetables and things like that that would keep us going. In fact, I can remember very clearly that they rounded up all the cattle that was in the area and slaughtered them because there was just no market for meat. You couldn't sell a heifer or a cow or a pig for anything. You know, you couldn't get any money for it.
I grew up mostly in Detroit. We kind of moved to Detroit in 1929, right at the start of the Depression. We didn't have any jobs. My father wasn't working. We were just poor. The soup kitchen, that's where we would go line up to eat. Just what it said, soup kitchen. You line up, you go in there and you sit down and you eat.
When Franklin Roosevelt took office in March of 1933, the official unemployment rate was 25%. But that grossly underestimated how many people were actually looking for work or unemployed. If your house was foreclosed upon, tough luck. The stock market was down 90%. Someone approached the great British economist John Maynard Keynes and said, "Have we ever seen anything like this depression before?" And he said, yes, it was called the Dark Ages and it lasted for 400 years.
According to the tradition in the United States at that time, English tradition was that it is not the government's responsibility to aid the needy. It's the responsibility of the family and the church, not the government, not the state government, not the local government, not the federal government. And forget about it. We're not going to do it. People had lost hope. They'd lost opportunity. There was practically no promise whatsoever of a job anywhere out there. So what do? I'll do whatever I have to. I'll get food wherever I can. I'll get clothing wherever I can. I'll get what I have to get, but I'll get it.
I remember having, discussions with individuals who were so angry that they were saying, to heck with the government. Maybe this whole system ought to be changed. The seeds were there. I mean, the people were there who were angry enough to do it. I would say that FDR is the one that saved this country, from having a revolt.
When Franklin Roosevelt took office in 1933, it was almost the perfect match of man and moment. He was somebody who could inspire people and use the crisis to redefine what we owe each other as a people. That's one of the reasons why the New Deal really was a new deal between the public and the government.
We are planning within a few days to ask the Congress for legislation to enable the government to undertake public works, thus stimulating directly and indirectly the employment of many others in well-considered projects.
Roosevelt believed that work was ultimately more important than relief. He wanted to put people to work as quickly as possible. The Civilian Conservation Corps was really the first of several jobs programs that Roosevelt developed. But the CCC was very close to his heart, and he took a very direct interest in it, and he designed a lot of it because he did have this long-time interest in conservation.
On his own farm there in Hyde Park, he saw the erosion. He saw the depletion of the forest. I was very well aware that in his entire state, the same thing's going on.
And of course, I'm a tremendous enthusiast on planting idle land and vacant acres, because with my own eyes, I have seen these trees growing. Some of them that I put in 20 years ago are almost as high as a house at the present time.
So he became governor in 29. We began putting young men to work, reforesting and repairing the gullies. Then became president, do it for the whole nation. Again, out of personal experience in his own hometown.
The opposition to the CCC was concerned that President Roosevelt was not focusing enough on the interests of business. They were very concerned about taxes, and they were very concerned about deficit spending.
The national debt today is 30 billions as compared to 19 billions under Hoover, and God knows Hoover was bad enough.
There were 15 major pieces of legislation in Roosevelt's first 100 days, and many of them had long-lasting effects, like the first regulation of Wall Street and price supports for agriculture. But there were also some really bad ideas in the first 100 days, things that didn't work, that actually may have even harmed the economy to some extent.
You can imagine at the time, Roosevelt saying we're going to plant 18 million trees, you know, and convincing people that this was the right thing to do.
Say, Pop, could I have a nickel?
5 cents? Don't bother me. Run on to bed. I want to hear how President Roosevelt's going to spend that $5 billion.
First, we are giving opportunity of employment to 250,000 of the unemployed, especially the young men who have dependents, to let them go into forestry and flood prevention work. That is a big task because it means feeding and clothing and caring for nearly twice as many men as we have in the regular army itself. And in creating this Civilian Conservation Corps, we are killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We are clearly enhancing the value of our natural resources, and at the same time, we are relieving an appreciable amount of actual distress.
Roosevelt made the point to Congress that we need to put young men to work immediately, and I proposed Civilian Conservation Corps to do that. And because all those politicians were aware that they had young men in their hometown and their home state that could vote for them next time around, we'll go with you. And very quickly came pass.
The most amazing part of it, to me, was the speed with which he got it going. 3 months later, by summer of 1933, 250,000 young men were in the CCC. It was the fastest mobilization in American history, and it has never been matched since.
The local welfare department recruited you. You had to be a citizen of the United States, had to be male, no she, had to be male. You had to be unemployed, and you had to be willing to spend 6 months, 8-hour day, $1 a day.
Your case has been investigated by the Welfare Board, and they've certified that your mother is in need of the $22 monthly allotment, which will be paid to her. As far as the government is concerned, that's the reason that you're here.
You mean this is a CCC camp and I gotta stay here about 6 months?
200 men per camp in every state across our union. Each state had a quota. The black population in the United States was about 10% at that time, and they were allowed 10% of the quota. And they go to separate camps. Same type of work, same type of food, same type of clothing, same everything, except segregated. White officers.
When Roosevelt first started this, it was black and white in the same companies, in some places. And they separated them in a hurry and put them, the black here and the white over here. The white was not going to be in there with the black.
You got to remember, in 1933, we were living in a very, very segregated society. So the idea of blacks even participating in the CCC was a huge move forward. In addition, in the early days of the CCC, Roosevelt waived the age requirement and said, if you're older and you've been a World War I veteran, and many of these veterans were in their 30s, you can join the CCC. About 25,000 joined right at the start, even though they only got paid $1 a day. The CCC was an enormous logistical feat that took place over the objections of most of Roosevelt's cabinet. The Army didn't want the extra responsibility. The Interior Department raised all kinds of questions. The fact that it was run in part by the Army, that it was called Roosevelt's Tree Army, and that it took place at a time when Mussolini and other fascists had their own private armies, gave rise to some controversy.
There was a CCC camp in our community in Texas. And there were some farmers who didn't like FDR and what he did. It was called the communist, the socialist, and whatever, any name you could find. So therefore, the CCCers also, of course, were no good as far as they were concerned. There was large numbers of people who felt that government intervention is not good for the country.
At Elmsford, New York, and in 1,400 other communities of the land, buildings for new civilian conservation corps camps are going up. In many a town, the coming of CCC camps causes public debate.
The entire moral tone of our community will suffer from a CCC camp. There'll be drunkenness and gambling. Our women will be constantly assaulted. I beg our selectmen to prevent this catastrophe.
The objections to it were considerable. The Labor Secretary, Frances Perkins, first woman in the cabinet, she said, we can't pay these people $1 a day. Organized labor is totally opposed to this.
The union wanted more and said, this is slave labor. What they were afraid of was, hey, we're going to wind up with $1 per day being the major labor price. So typical Roosevelt savvy, he appointed a union man to head the program.
Right after high school, I graduated in '33. My dad pretty well run me off. I hoboed and hitchhiked around trying to find a job. You'd ride in a boxcar or whatever you could. I asked people if they had work to do, that they'd give me something to eat. And they never would let me work. They'd always give me something to eat.
We lived very close to the railroad tracks. And you could see young people, they would stop there in our little town. They were looking for jobs. Of course, there were no jobs in our little town. Some of them would stick around and go to the soup kitchen that was there, close to the railroad tracks, and get a little something to eat, and wait for maybe the next railroad car that comes along, and they'd jump on it, and off they go.
I rode the trains, hobo, for about a year. And then I decided I better go home. Too cold to be out like that. So that's when I heard of the CCCs.
My neighbor had enrolled. He came home on furlough and began talking, and the more he talked, the more I became interested. And from that, I went and sought to get enlisted and get enrolled, and wound up in the same camp my neighbor was. A little camp in Lexington, North Carolina, a soil conservation camp. Most of it was first time to have a toothbrush, first time to have a vaccination, first time to have a daily bath, all these first.
I was determined I'm gonna stay and finish school. I made that. But after getting out of school, there were no jobs, and we were just in the street. Some of my friends went to the CCC. When they came home, they had money, they had different clothes, and they were the last word. They convinced me and a lot of my buddies to go in the CC.
I joined the CCs in September of 1934. I was 18 when I went in, and they took them up to 25. I liked it mainly because that was the only time in my life I ever had 2 pairs of shoes. You had your medical and 3 squares a day, and you only worked about 6 hours a day. I'd been accustomed to working 12, 14 hours a day on the farm. I thought I really had it made.
Roosevelt was the best thing that ever happened. He didn't only do something for the poor black man, he did something for the poor white man too. Because it was more of them poor than it was us. You know, now we eating regular. We got clothes. They teaching us to work. And we were learning something.
Men of the Civilian Conservation Corps, in speaking to you tonight, I am thinking of you as a visible token of encouragement to the whole country. Through you, the nation will graduate a fine group of strong young men, clean living, trained to self-discipline, and above all, willing and proud to work for the joy of working. That, my friends, must be the new spirit of the American future. And you are the vanguard of that new spirit.
It seemed so very normal to hear that voice come across. We'd laugh at its pronunciation, some of the R's, of course, but by and large, it was a warm feeling. This man is our man.
The Civilian Conservation Corps had the Army style. You know, you had reveille, answer, roll call, and then we'd go back to the barracks. Had to keep your bunk all made up nice and everything clean. In a little bit, breakfast would be ready.
Good breakfast with eggs and bacon and sausage and that, pancakes and waffles, you know, juice, all kinds. Plenty of everything. You get all you want. Then by 7:30, I was on a truck on the way to the site where we were going to work.
You get out there in that hot sun, it's all 100 degrees, and you working all day, and you sweating, and you work right up to lunchtime. Then they bring your food out to the field. Now, that was quite a thing, too. We wasn't used to nothing like this.
Food that you wouldn't believe. Good food. Sandwiches, I mean, with a lot of meat and plenty of everything. Apples, bananas. I mean, you were waiting for that food. Then you'd be back to work.
We were hard-working boys. By 4 o'clock, you're back to the barracks, and you have a little time for recreation. 6 o'clock, it's chow time, and we were always ready to eat more. I firmed up. I became much sounder in body, built good legs, that territory as well, and wound up a fairly good, healthy young teenager.
Fed you good. Yep. I come out of weighing 174 pounds, and the most I ever weighed in my life.
A lot of the newsreels in the 30s featured the CCC.
Here are members of America's Jobless Army taking to the woods at Camp Roosevelt, first of the President's concentration units. And are they happy to get back to work?
This is a break, and the first one I've had for a long time. Everything is going to be swell here now, and I ask nothing better than this chance to cut away from the past and breathe some fresh air. Camp is a wonderful physical developer. I wouldn't take $500 for the experience I'm going through here. It beats, brother, can you spare a dime?
You had millions of young men working out in the countryside, in the sunshine, clearing trails, planting trees. It was good footage. The pictures were good. And Roosevelt understood that immediately. And he also liked to have himself photographed at CCC camps.
It's very good to be here at these Virginia CCC camps. I wish I could see them all over the country. I hope that all over the country they're in as fine condition as the camps that I've seen today. I wish that I could take a couple of months off from the White House and come down here and live with them, because I know I'd get full of health the way they have. The only difference is that they've put on an average of about 12 pounds apiece since they got here, and I'm trying to take off 12 pounds.
The CCC was a win-win for FDR. He both put hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of people to work, and he also did something for posterity, for future generations, for what we would now call the environment.
It was a healing. Heal the man, heal the land. Taking land that had been totally devastated, replanting it, rebuilding it. We're talking about land improvement and conservation all across the country.
The condition of the land in Texas was absolutely depleted. Rotating crops, that sort of thing had not been done. A lot of it had been left fallow after they had raised cotton year in and year out. So mesquite would take over. And that's the mesquite that we went in and cleared out and made it into permanent pastures, which is really what we're talking about in so far as the environment is concerned, and that is to do things that will reproduce themselves forever. That's conservation at its best. We did a lot of contouring. We did a lot of water conservation. So we CCCers came along as the first environmentalists.
Before FDR, most of our national forests were very slow in getting improvement. For example, there were very few fire trails and fire roads. One fire could wipe the thing out. But CC boys came in, and that changed, rapidly changed.
When there'd be a fire, the forestry department, they would call to the different camps and get the CCC to fight these fires. You get out there in that fire, well, that was one of the most dangerous jobs we had. First, they'd have you cut a lane where the fire wouldn't jump over. Then we didn't have, with the shovels, most of it was shovels. We didn't have too much water supply unless you're right near a river or something. And you fight till you get that fire down where you can handle it. And you were tired and beat up and all your clothes was burnt and you was dirty from that dust that you was throwing. But we get the fire out. Then you get on this truck, you might have to ride 25 or 30 miles back to camp. Sometimes further than that. You get in there, you clean up, you have your dinner, and most of the time you're too tired to do anything but go to sleep. But that was the way of life, and we was enjoying it. It was different. Now, just like other places, you had racism, but you just had to deal with it. It was some areas they did not want no 45 or 50 black young men sitting out there close to their settlement. And some of them places, we didn't want to be sitting out there with them neither. They never believed that we could work. There's a lot of them. But once we get the chance, that's what did it. And coming up to that CCC give you the know-how to get in there and get it done. The CC really taught you to have a backbone, stand up for yourself, and don't let nobody run over you.
The CCC core members came from very different backgrounds. They were thrust together, sent out from whatever neighborhood they came from, out into the countryside, put in these barracks, and they had to learn how to deal with each other. The only thing they had in common was that they were poor and they needed a job.
I had to not only work with people who had come from families who were extremely poor, but people who had become poor all of a sudden. Some of them were highly educated, had PhDs, and some of them hadn't been through the first grade. People who had been in business lost their jobs, and now the CCC was their only remedy. And to have to go and work at the CCC for $30 a month. Well, all of us, you know, were in the same boat.
whether it was carpentry work, steel work, or rock quarry work. I don't remember anybody in my outfit cussing what they did. You know, by them knowing they were going to have 3 meals a day and a place to sleep and recreation and all that stuff. Everybody was enthused about what they did. But I don't care if you get in with a bunch of guys, you're going to have conflicts periodically. And we solved ours by grudge fights. You know, 2 guys couldn't get along. We had a ring, boxing ring, and we'd get them in there and let them fight it out.
Many of our boys couldn't read or write. So one of the first things that FDR said, they will be taught to read and write. Nobody, no boy will leave our camps illiterate. We were taught the idea that, hey, you can do things. You can do better than what you've done in the past. You do have a future. So we believe that.
After dinner, they had vocational type classes available to persons who wanted them. Typing classes, or plumbing and electrical, that sort of thing. In my camp, there was an opening for a company clerk. So I went and practiced after work on my typing skills. And the company commander said, okay, he said, you're hired. You're going to be my company clerk. So then I was an office worker then. From then on, I didn't have to go out in the field. I did the payroll. Each member received $30. $25 went home automatically.
Each man would send home $25 each month and keep $5 for himself. Now, the dollar had enormous purchasing power in the 1930s. So $25 sent home multiplies across the nation by 1,000. That's a lot of economic improvement nationwide. Now, not only were the boys there employed, remember they had support people, foremen, superintendents, engineers, all this. So here are skilled people employed as well. Then supplying the camp, food, all the things it takes to run a camp for a week, that went to the local economy also. So it was a major impact on all the economies wherever the camps went. And they went everywhere.
Franklin Roosevelt was a very clever politician, and he planted CCC camps all over the country in strategically designated congressional districts. And that helped to build public support for the program. And when he ran for re-election in 1936, which was really a referendum on the CCC and Social Security and the other New Deal programs, he carried all but 2 states, Maine and Vermont. He had the largest victory since George Washington.
The CCC had a newspaper called Happy Days, and this repeatedly pointed out all the good things that the boys are doing across the country, and the fact that, hey, this is not only a land improvement, it's improvement in patriotism, it's improvement in awareness and cultural awareness, and it was, very much so.
Of course, after payday, we would go into town, and have that $5 to spend. We had a roller rink pretty close. I think it cost $25 to skate all night. And that's where you'd meet your girls and stuff. I know a couple of the boys met local gals, and they married them.
My first camp, I was in the middle of a town. We'd go to movies, go bowling, all those good things. The boys hated us. The boys didn't, the girls loved us. The local people, by and large, were glad to see us because the work was being done on their farms.
In my company, about 80% of the members were Mexican Americans. Going into town was the problem. The people in town hated FDR, they hated CCC, and more than that, they hated the Mexican Americans who were members of the CCC. You had to be careful where you went to get a hamburger or a sandwich or where you went to get a drink. Some of the bartenders said, "I'm sorry, but we don't serve Mexicans." Well, one of the guys just rammed him right away and tore the place up, and we took off, went back to the inside the camp where they couldn't do anything with us. But we tore up the place. But that happened a number of times, even though they accepted the work that we were doing in and around the area.
Civilian Conservation Corps made me understand how other people lived and realize that we should all just get along well with each other. Like I used to think I was better than a Mexican because there's no Mexicans in Illinois when I was growing up. You know, and all the farm boys and girls just all white like me. So that mixture helped me a lot to know other types of people and realize that they're just like anybody else.
Even in my own camp, there were individuals who were outright racists, you know, to individuals who were the recipients of racism. I learned that we could get both sides to come together, that we could convince them to work as a community or work together. Human relations was important. Human rights was important. That value that I learned or I picked up in CCCs was with me from then on, and that stayed with me the rest of my life.
We got to see basically a change not only in us, but also in the total environment, an improvement, not a deterioration, but a major improvement. No more looking up and watching Kansas pass by, no more looking and seeing the rivers flood, no more of the business of fires everywhere, but an environment that was pleasant to experience, providing an enjoyable change of pace from the city. Come up into the mountain country and see nature on all sides, have a picnic, and enjoy the beauty of our country.
There are places that most people have no idea that the CCCs were the ones that built them. Camp David, for example, was built by the CCCs. Carlsbad Caverns, we built everything except the cave. And when you look at all of the state parks and national parks that were built by the CCCs, then you can begin to see what happened to this nation as a whole. That changed the entire recreational patterns of this nation.
If you go out on a hike now, all over the United States, there's a very good chance that the trail you're hiking on was cut by the CCC. The first ski trails in the United States, in Vermont, were also cut by the CCC. So a paralyzed president who couldn't walk, much less ski, indirectly launched the American ski industry. any agency of government that manages to plant 2.3 billion with a B trees, to create 800 state parks, to save the topsoil of the United States, it has to be considered one of the most pro-environmental organizations ever established.
We realize now that we committed excesses, which we are today seeking to atone for. We used up, we destroyed much of our natural heritage just because that heritage was so bountiful. We have tried sincerely and honestly to look ahead to the future years. We are at last definitely engaged in the task of conserving the bounties of nature, thinking in the terms of the whole of nature.
I was in the CC for 23 months and 4 days. Never forget it. And I left because it's going to take the men out the CC and send them straight in the Army. It's time for us to make a move.
The coming of Pearl Harbor and the movement of the United States into World War II brought an enormous demand for manpower. That was the axe that killed the CCC. By July of 1942, the CCC was phased out. Gone.
Without the CCCs, I really don't know what we would have done. We did not have an army prepared to go to war, and here was approximately 2.5 or 3 million men who were prepared and had been organized to work together. I joined the Air Force in 1941, and they didn't have to do a hell of a lot of training for me. I was prepared.
Nobody didn't have to tell you about how to make a bed and how it should be done, how to clean your clothes, and they didn't have to tell you if the man tell you to go do something, you didn't ask questions, you do it. The CCC made me a man. It made me respect discipline and how to work and get along with people.
The CCC not only was a major foundation of our ethic of national service in this country, but also an ethic of conservation. After generations of Americans essentially raping the land for whatever it was worth economically, as happens in so many other parts of the world, suddenly there's a break in that in the 30s. And you have a pretty large chunk of a generation, 3 million people, who have some experience in conserving the land instead of exploiting the land, to care about what we leave behind.
Recently, we went back to find the camp we was in. I went back up there and seen them trees where they got them where you can't cut them down. And my little granddaughter, she was telling them, all these trees, she said her grandpa planted all the trees up there.
Who were the people who pioneered the environmental movement in this country and who now are helping us to transition to more of a green ethic? Many of their parents and grandparents were in the CCC. An ethic of conservation is then born and developed, nurtured and built, because it's all a generational conversation that takes place, that one thing builds on another, builds on another.
You know, I met a lady at a wingding for us old people that knew exactly where my camp was. And she says, because I told her after we got acquainted with each other, I told her I'd just love to go back and see what my camp where my camp was. And she said, you couldn't visualize what a change you guys made.
Exclusive corporate funding for American Experience is provided by Liberty Mutual. Major funding is made possible by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. American Experience is also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you. Thank you.